Hello and welcome to today's Here's to Your Health podcast. I'm Don Linsman, Executive Director of Marketing and Development at Crawford County Memorial Hospital. My guest on the podcast today is Patrick Stevens. Patrick is the Director of Cardiopulmonary Services here at CCMH. And Patrick, thank you for joining me today.
It's nice to be here.
Yeah, so our conversation today is going to center on a program coming up in January, starts in January, called Freedom from Smoking. But before we do that, I want to just talk to you a little bit about cardiopulmonary services, and just so that the people who are listening today get a feeling for what it is that you actually do in your job. Let's describe that for them for just a minute.
Basically, I'm educated in pretty much all things heart and lungs. Here at Crawford, I mainly focus on the lungs, doing all the nebulizer treatments on the floor. I assist in work in emergent situations, the cardiac arrests. I also do cardiac monitoring, EKGs. We have several different types of cardiac monitors. And just when anybody has a respiratory emergency, I'm the one they call.
And you've been doing this for a long time. I mean, this is not, you're not a Johnny-come-lately to this. This has been almost a lifelong pursuit for you.
It has been a lifelong. That's right out of high school. I pretty much went to respiratory therapy school, and that's what I've done ever since. So I've been doing this since 1981.
So if there's anybody who's an expert, we have 40 years of experience. If there's anybody who's an expert at this, it's you.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Freedom from Smoking, and if you can, let's describe that program for our listeners today.
Basically, the Freedom from Smoking class, it's an American Lung Association class that's been around for probably 20 years or longer. I am a certified instructor for it. What we do in the class is the first 2 weeks we talk about your smoking habits and what triggers you to smoke and when you smoke and why you smoke and all the psychological effects, as well as we determine if you're ready to quit smoking, because you have to be at the right place to be ready to quit smoking. And we work on those things the first 2 sessions. The third session will be quit day. So we got some techniques we'll introduce there so that when you leave class on the third day, you'll be done smoking. The third week is the only week we meet twice. Just because of quit day, we'll meet 2 days later just to give you more support and maybe address some issues you ran into, that type of stuff. And the rest of the class is support and resources and techniques to keep you from going back to smoking.
My guest on the podcast today is Patrick Stevens. Patrick is the Director of Cardiopulmonary Services here at CCMH. We're talking about the Freedom from Smoking class that CCMH will have that will begin in mid-January. You know, Patrick, what's interesting to me about freedom from smoking, you talked about the psychological aspects of this, and from all the research that I've done, everything that I've seen, maybe it doesn't start out that way. Maybe the smoking is a response to a stress, or maybe it's just something that you picked up because everybody else was doing it. Maybe a little peer pressure. You know, I know that's why my dad started smoking all those many years ago. But after a while, we develop both a physical dependency on that habit, but there's also maybe a psychological dependency. And if you could tell us more about that, I would appreciate it.
There is both, like you're saying. There is the physical dependency, the nicotine addiction, which is one of the more difficult addictions to break free from. But there is the psychological. We found that it becomes very habit forming. You know, you get up in the morning and you drink your first cup of coffee and you pick up a cigarette, or you answer the phone and you pick up a cigarette, or you get in the car and you pick up a cigarette. Those are difficult to quit too. So we have techniques for the psychological portion of it, as well as we can do nicotine dependency drugs to help you get off of the nicotine as well.
What you're saying is absolutely the case, because if you have a habit that you want to replace, you typically, or you want to quit, you have to replace it with another habit that actually is better for you. That sometimes is difficult to find, that habit that you can use to replace what you just talked about, picking up the phone and getting a cigarette or whatever the case might happen to be. When we talk about freedom from smoking, it's just not cigarettes, though. There's other tobacco products that go into this.
Correct. It's actually, initially the program started as being targeted at cigarettes, but we found that it applies to all tobacco products. So if you chew tobacco and want to quit, this is a good class for you to come to as well. Recently, vaping has become a thing, and that is also addressed. So vaping is very similar to cigarette smoking as well. So
we're going to talk a little bit more about vaping because I think this is a very interesting topic. But before we do that, I want to remind people that Patrick Stevens is our guest on the podcast today. We're talking about freedom from smoking. Patrick is the director of cardiopulmonary services here at CCMH, 40 years in the field, and so he knows a thing or two about what we're talking about today. When vaping was introduced, Patrick, it would be, about 10 years ago? Maybe a little bit, kind of in that neighborhood. The concept at that point was, this is going to be better because this is not actually smoking. But I don't think it's turned out that way.
No, it hasn't. What has happened is the companies are putting stronger nicotine in the vaping devices. There's also other things that they put flavorings. They put food flavorings in them. The vanilla and the strawberry are generally food flavorings, and we're finding they're having some pretty bad effects on the lungs.
And you mentioned before we got started today, we were just chatting about this, and you mentioned something called popcorn lung. Now, I like popcorn, but I don't think I'd like popcorn lung.
No, popcorn lung can be very severe very quick. It doesn't have the long... most effects from cigarettes is a build-up over many years. If you get popcorn lung, it usually happens in 2 or 3 years or less, and it's very debilitating. It's called popcorn lung because when we take an x-ray of your lungs, it looks like you have popcorn in your lungs on the x-ray.
Oh my.
So it's really pretty devastating disease.
So let's talk just a little bit more about the freedom from smoking class then. And, when we're talking about all of these different dependencies, which is what this is, and it's nicotine, whether it's a tobacco product or it's a product introduced through vaping, it's this nicotine dependency that people have. One thing that you said earlier on is that it's about breaking habits, but I know that in some instances, people are going to need something extra to help them get over the top of this, and sometimes it's things like a nicotine patch, but then sometimes it ends up being something more than that. And maybe you can speak to that for just a minute.
There's several nicotine replacement therapies to help wean you off the nicotine. As Don mentioned, the nicotine patch, there's nicotine gum, there's Chantix, and I think they're still using Wellbutrin some for the nicotine replacement to help you get through those cravings.
Yeah, and if anybody wonders whether or not I have any personal experience with this, my dad began smoking when he was 12 years old. He died of brain cancer when he was 51. And undoubtedly, the cigarette smoking had everything to do with that. But when he tried to quit smoking, not only was he smoking, but he also had the nicotine patch, and he was chewing nicotine gum at the same time. So it really didn't take for him, unfortunately. And there are some people, I suppose, maybe who would look at this and say, well, I don't know that I can quit. What would you say to people who say, I don't know that I could actually do that?
Well, number one, you have to psychologically be ready. Number two, they found the average person who is successful at quitting has to try at least 6 times before they're free of the nicotine. That's the average, is on your 6th attempt, you'll finally get free of nicotine.
Wow. My guest on the podcast today is Patrick Stevens. Patrick is the Director of Cardiopulmonary Services here at CCMH. We're talking about the Freedom from Smoking program that will begin here at CCMH in the middle of January. Patrick, dates for the beginning, the cost for this, and who do they contact in order to be able to get signed up for this?
We are starting class on January 16th. It will be at 7:30 in the evening, and it runs about 90 minutes, depending on class size and content or questions and that type of stuff. But average is about 90 minutes, and we will meet for 7 weeks, but that'll be 7 weeks with 8 sessions, because the third week we have the support session after quit day, and you can just give a call to the switchboard and tell them you'd like to register.
So that's 265-2500, main
Correct.
number here at CCMH, and they will get you signed up. And the cost for this, Patrick?
Is $25.
$25 gets you the whole shebang.
Correct.
Yeah. So I guess the way that I would like to close today is maybe because of the 40 years of experience that you've had in working with people in this particular area, what would you say the success rate is for programs like this? You said it takes 6 times to get through it. Just in your experience, as we finish up today, maybe we give people some hope. You know that they can do this if they really want to.
I would take a guess at about 80% success rate. It's pretty high, but the other thing is, it takes. They used to have the old slogan of "Don't quit quitting." And that is very true, because even the people that have quit and been quit for many years, if you ask them, they'll say, oh yes, every once in a while I get that craving and I want to have a cigarette. So it's kind of a lifelong thing. Once you quit, you just got to keep at it.
You have to be a little vigilant with that too. Thank you for your time today, Patrick. I appreciate it very much.
Yes, it was nice being here.
My guest on the podcast today is Patrick Stevens. Patrick is the Director of Cardiopulmonary Services here at CCMH. We're talking about the Freedom from Smoking class. It begins on January 16th here at CCMH. 8 sessions in 7 weeks, and each session runs approximately 90 minutes. Cost for the class is $25 to sign up. All you have to do is call the main number here at CCMH. That is 712-265-2500. I'm Don Lintzman, Executive Director of Marketing and Development at Crawford County Memorial Hospital. We care for life.